everybody. Welcome to the Construction Record Podcast. I'm digital media editor Warren Frey, and today I have with me
Sean Meadows. I'm the geography leader for Arup in Canada, and I'm pleased to be joined by.
This is Charles Ormsby. I am the sustainability and climate services leader for Arup in Canada. It's a real pleasure.
Okay, and then my first question is, what are some of Arup's Canadian operations? Because it sounds like it's an international firm.
Yeah, we are an international firm, and just to provide a little context, I mean, we've been a global advisory engineering service firm for the past 75 years. We have about 17,000 members around the world, consisting of advisors, architects, engineers, and planners focused on providing clients with integrated solutions in the built environment. Our business in Canada was established a little over 20 years ago. We have about 425 members currently. They're based in Toronto and Montreal, and we're supporting projects across the country, which include the next phase of the Broadway extension in British Columbia. We're supporting Infrastructure Alberta currently on the construction of the Calgary Cancer Centre. We're the lead designers on the Finch West LRT project. We're designing new labs at University of Toronto and McMaster Universities. We've been working with GTA and Airport de Montréal for a number of years with the planning and upgrading of their airport terminals. And we supported Infrastructure Canada with the design and construction of the new Champlain Bridge in Montreal, and are providing support to Pomelo with the deconstruction of their activities. We also do several other projects supporting a number of clients that range from site master planning to creating green infrastructure standards for cities. Our focus really is to provide fully integrated solutions in the transportation, science industry, technology, healthcare, higher education, social infrastructure, and water and energy markets.
Next, I'll jump to, you mentioned all the things, the infrastructure-wise you're involved in. What are some of this is all about sustainability. So what are some ways that transit health services, institutional construction, how can they focus on and achieve sustainability? How have they done that, and how can they in the future go forward and continue to do that in an improved way?
Chuck, to lead on that?
Yeah, I mean, really, it's all looking at it as part of a bigger picture. We know that we have an enormous amount of our population throughout the world are living in cities, and urbanization is just going to increase. That's a Canadian issue, but that's a global issue as well. And coming from this means that we have then cities which we have to work with to make more resilient, more sustainable, and more inclusive and more equitable all across the board. And that will make sure that means we need to ensure that we have all sorts of systems, these urban systems that are in place to respond to that. Whether that's energy or transport, water, housing, all of these has to be provided in a manner that means it's accessible to all, appropriate for all, and helps us as a globe transition to a zero carbon community and respecting the planetary boundaries within which we're living. So, I mean, maybe Sean, you can talk a little bit more specifically about some of the specifics in terms of transit, for example, that we're implementing across Canada.
Yeah, for sure, Chuck. I mean, I think obviously transit provides connectivity from both a social impact standpoint, allowing more people affordable transit to get to places they need to work on. I think across this country, we've worked on a number of projects, like we talked about Finch West LRT. Sustainable outcomes really from transit obviously talks about reducing the impacts, taking cars off the road, providing people less commute times, allowing them more time to spend times with their families or doing other things, providing them both social benefits, but also providing the benefits that we talk about to society as it relates to climate change and the carbon output from these. I think there's still a long way to go, however, right? I mean, we need to talk about these projects and look at them. We're not looking at them enough from a circular economy perspective, particularly thinking about the construction materials that we're using. And what is the outcome of these materials, say, in their 30-year life cycle? And what happens to all this material when we're tearing it down? Also, we talk about vehicle technologies. There's been a lot of great innovation that's been created in these spaces. But what is next? How do we create energy storage systems or energy efficient solutions that allow these vehicles to be powered and more effective and produce less of a carbon footprint, whether it be LRT or not so much LRT systems, but when we talk about some of the bus rapid transit solutions that we work on as well.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, I think these are all sort of ingredients as part of the recipe towards net zero transport, which is, transit is one of the elements, and really looking beyond that is multimodal approach and ensuring that individuals have access to multiple options so that they can affordably get to where they need to go. And at the same time, looking from the bare essentials of maybe bringing those services closer. I'm sure you've heard about the 15-minute city principles, but really making sure that people of all different ages, all different capacities have access to those services within a walking distance as much as possible, and otherwise with a sustainable means of transport, whether that's active transport through biking, cycling, or sustainable methods with low emission vehicles or zero emission vehicles. So we're really looking at it from that wide perspective to make sure that everybody does have access to this, and it's all moving towards that net zero transport.
Okay, and in terms of transport specifically, but other things too, Canada's big, spread out, and cold mostly. But at the same time, I'm in Vancouver, and we had a heat dome that was off the charts. So there's that challenge as well. What are some change and sustainability challenges that are particularly important for Canada that we have? I'm sure other countries have to deal with this too, but stuff that we specifically have to deal with.
Yeah. So I mean, climate change is happening now, and unless we work together globally to tackle this, there will be, unfortunately, significant pain and hardship going forward. And so we have to work on this in a collaborative effort, and we have to see this as not just a community issue, not just as a national issue, but actually an international issue where we have one planet, and the effects that are done or the impacts that we have locally may have other repercussions that are international, and vice versa. And so if we look at nationwide, coast to coast into the north in Canada, we have the Atlantic provinces, which are particularly vulnerable because the communities are generally coastal cities. Coastal cities or coastal townships, which are particularly sensitive to some of the effects of climate change, rising sea levels, strong gale winds, increases in storm intensities. All of these elements have significant impact and can be detrimental to the infrastructure and for the livelihoods that are there. If we look at Quebec and Ontario, we've seen a lot of impacts in terms of sensitivities to urban heat island effects and increased mortalities during heat waves, for example, that are directly related to a lack of access and certainly equitable access to opportunities for cooling, whether that's passive or through technology. Through the prairies, which is really a cradle of industry, of agriculture, we've seen droughts which have really ravished some of the agricultural sectors. We have changes in terms of the different pests that are present in those locations as well as part of climate change and biodiversity trends. If we go further out west, we've seen, I mean, you just have to look in the news or you have experienced it yourself. I mean, Warren, you're on the West Coast, but wildfires, which are more present, landslides. We have flooding issues. We have, again, invasive species which are making their way through the forest to the north and have no natural predators. So really, these issues are coast to coast. And if we look at the north, which, I mean, truly is Canadian, we have in our northern communities, Indigenous populations, who have a history of really relying on very resilient and robust cultures and methodologies of working with nature. As nature changes and the climate changes, we have a major issue, permafrost, which is starting to thaw. That means the infrastructure that those communities rely on for transport, for water, for supply, for energy, become very unstable, and those communities become even more remote and vulnerable. And I'd say a feedback impact of that as well is as that permafrost thaws, you then have greenhouse gas emissions which are emanated from that had been locked up for years and years and years, and that just accelerates the greenhouse gas emissions and the global warming potential. So really, I mean, across Canada, you don't have to look through reports from the International Panel on Climate Change. You just have to experience it yourself or have seen this in the news, that climate change is now, and we are all working on this for our own livelihood, but also to be able to share that information, those lessons learned internationally.
Okay, and did you have anything else to add, Sean?
No, I think Chuck summarized it quite well. I mean, I think one of our biggest challenges as a country is we're just so dependent on fossil fuels. You look at the way the majority of us heat our homes to the way we use transport. We need to come up with a transition from that energy source to more renewable, more sustainable types of sources. But otherwise, yeah, Chuck's nothing more to elaborate.
Okay, and conversely, what are some Canadian success stories in terms of cities, presumably, but also other areas too, where people have really been making progress with sustainability?
Do you want to start, Sean?
Yeah, well, sure. I mean, we've talked about it before. I mean, we're seeing more and more a move to actually, increase the capacity of our public transportation networks, right?
Mhm.
I think this does make a difference. We're working with clients such as Via Rail right now as well to try and drive better outcomes for transportation between, Quebec City and Toronto. We're looking at trying to reduce the carbon footprint from the way we use, or again, push people to use more methods of public transit. We're also, some success stories around this country is the push to actually get away from zero, to get to more battery powered vehicles, get away from actually having cars that rely 100% on gasoline. So, I mean, I think that's some of the success stories we can look at. I think there's other success stories, like talking about France, for example, that we need to explore, where they're saying there will no longer be any intercity flights within France by, I think it's 2025, the date, or 2030. I can't remember the exact date there. But there's still a lot we could do in that public transit space. I think there's also been a significant push where we're seeing more and more clients, more and more cities actually looking to implement green infrastructure, more creative ways to, for example, to look at how do we impact, or how do we deal with wastewater, and how do we deal with some of these flooding situations in a green way versus building more and more sewer tunnels. We're also seeing a number of people looking to change the way that we construct projects, looking for different materials. So I think there's a lot of positives that you can point across this country without getting into any specific examples. Chuck, you probably have a few direct examples that you'd want to point out.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it stems from just the awareness now amongst within the industry and owners and client sectors that we have to ask, what is the environmental impact of my project? And so a lot of clients are coming to us and saying, we want to have a positive impact as a result of this project on the society, on the environment, and it has to be economically viable. So how do we do that? So we've been working a lot with different organizations to really develop, I'd say, tailored approaches to applying sustainability approaches that are fit for purpose and practical, pragmatic, and viable economically. So one example was with a hospital in northern Montreal, in Laval, who really came to us and said, we need a parking lot, but we want to have a positive impact. So the first question is, well, do you really need a parking lot? Can you avoid that? Are there other ways of providing transport? And they had, already as a campus done quite a bit to promote that. And this was an opportunity to provide, better access for their employees, to provide much needed services. But really, how do you take what is, a very ordinary project and one that is, repeated countless times across the nation, and have instead of it being a blight on the urban horizon, how can you actually turn that to be positive in terms of the environment? And so by developing ways of incorporating sustainability into parking lots, we've been able to develop with them a site which houses 400 parking spots, but at the same time has been wonderful in terms of creating biodiversity. Has been treating rainwater and managing rainwater and returning it back to the earth in a very high quality. Has been able to provide greater space that's healthier for the staff to be able to go jogging and walking throughout the time during their breaks. The neighbors from a seniors residence are able to walk through this area, and this is still a parking lot. It's not a park. It's not a public realm necessarily. This is a parking lot, which otherwise would just be concrete jungle. And I mean, to the point where we even observed last time we were out there just seeing how it was performing, a goose nest that was laid in some of the rain gardens that were really literally between two parked cars. So you can see how just taking an ordinary project, but stopping and thinking, saying, well, wait a second, how can we rethink this? We're able to deliver something that has a positive impact on the society, on biodiversity, and from a planetary point of view in terms of adopting low emissions and low carbon solutions. And all of this while dropping the construction cost by $200,000. So sustainability does not mean more expensive. If it's done well at the right time, it's actually, it's cost effective. And that's why the three pillars of sustainability are society, the environment, and the economy. We have to think of those three elements together.
Okay, and besides the real world, there's also the digital world. So explain the concept of digital resiliency to me, because that's a new one on me.
It's a term that yeah, you don't hear about too much, but you will increasingly. So Sean, maybe you can have a first stab.
Yeah, I think it's kind of means different things to different people and where you, depending on who you speak with, right? I mean, digital resiliency really is about, for us, we define it as kind of the security, availability, reliability, continuity, and capacity of data that we rely on. And how do we achieve this, right? And a common strategy actually is storing data in multiple offsite locations. And why is it important? I mean, just some simple facts around it is, internet traffic is forecasted to grow by 50% year over year until 2030, right? 70% of the world's population have a mobile phone. Over 50% of those operate on 5G or greater, right? By 2050, they expect that there'll be 50 billion Internet of Things devices connected to the internet. Cybercrime, we all know, is continuing to increase around the world. The last reported number we saw was about one data breach would cost approximately $3.9 million to an organization. And because of this, the cloud computing industry has doubled in size it's estimated to double in size from 2020 to 2025, from 370 billion a year to over 800 billion. So, when we talk about digital resiliency, it's not only enough to just think about, the integrity of the data and how do we protect the data, but it actually comes down to also how do we protect a lot of these large data centers. And it's important that we think about that. And actually, those data centers obviously are impacted by climate change and, sustainable outcomes that we need to be thinking about in our design. And I know, Chuck, you're aware of some of the digital tools that we've been developing with people and clients to kind of help with this.
Yeah, I mean, because ultimately, data has a physical component, right? Whereas it's easy to think of it as sort of this black box solution, it has to be stored somewhere physically. And data centers presently are the locations which store those. And cloud computing services excel, and it is their core business to ensure the integrity and the availability of that data. So being able to really place your trust in these data centers means that they have to go above and beyond to understand risks and ensure that resilience measures are implemented for their systems. And so that means looking at, across a portfolio, a series of different sites which might be eligible for the establishment of a data center, but then being able to assess in terms of climatic risk, natural hazard risk, geopolitical risks, what the profile is, so they can then decide whether that is appropriate or not, and then implement the measures. One of the challenges of doing this traditionally is that that's a lot of data collection. The methods, the workflows are sometimes not repeated from one location to another. And so from our experience, Arup has launched effectively a new platform called Iris that allows organizations with property portfolios to better tackle the growing threats posed by climate change. So we're combining our multidisciplinary engineering expertise with sophisticated cloud-based simulations to forecast this risk and test out and optimize mitigations and track progress toward organizational resilience as actions are taken. So really it's looking at this and saying, okay, well, how can we do our risk analyses in a way that are most effective, replicable, and reliable across a portfolio, so that when we identify locations for data centers, and this could be for other things, for university campuses, for example, for property developers and their assets, for healthcare campuses, to understand at any point in time, what is the risk that I am exposed to from natural hazards that might be seismic conditions or floods, and be able to then respond to that and plan to make sure that you have enough redundancy in your system and you can always meet the levels that you need.
Okay, and finally, if people want to look at that platform you mentioned, or in fact anything Arup is doing, where should they go to find more information?
Yeah, I mean, I think Arup.com is probably the first source where we have a lot of information that's available, and quite frankly, a lot of what we do within Arup is not meant just to be kept internally. We invest a lot as a trust in research, and we have a lot of partnerships, and it's core to our to what keeps us passionate about working in the built environment, working in collaborations with universities. We've recently been working with McGill University on the development of a low carbon concrete specification for the Canadian industry, which will be available shortly. So work like that is absolutely essential. And so also on public platforms such as the C40 or McGill University eventually, that research and the efforts that are fueled by a lot of the expertise that we're bringing in globally, but also the projects and the experience and the data that we have access to is available. And Arup.com has a number of links throughout there and thoughts and whatnot, plenty to fill up an afternoon.
Okay, Charles and Sean, thanks for joining us today.